Man, wouldn't you just love to live in Bhutan? Look at this place. The whole country is a Himalayan wonderland. Wouldn't it be weird if they had a history of rampant slavery where they imported hundreds of slaves from Assam, Sikkim, and Bengal as recently as 1958? Okay, but at least today they have the happiest people in the world and they all get free education and healthcare. Sure, unless you're one of the 3 lakh Nepali Hindus living there, who, despite having migrated to Bhutan in the 19th century, still aren't allowed to become citizens, and they face discrimination in everything from their education to where they can live and work. Why does no one talk about this? As recently as 1990, a massive campaign of ethnic cleansing forced more than 1 lakh Nepali Hindus in Bhutan to either flee the country or face intense discrimination, torture, rape, and even death. Nepalis who'd lived in Bhutan for decades were being asked for proof of residence, and those that couldn't provide it were deported en masse to Nepal. Thousands of them were herded into overcrowded refugee camps where they had to endure starvation and disease. Bhutan's image of a peaceful Buddhist paradise is nothing more than an elaborate PR makeover for a country that openly discriminates against nearly 35% of their population, a people they imported into Bhutan to help with farming and manual labor. They forced the entire population to speak the official Bhutanese language, wear traditional Bhutanese clothes, and outlawed the centuries-old practices of Nepali Hindus living there. So I decided to dig deeper to understand what the hell is going on inside Bhutan. How did the country that somehow has a major slavery and discrimination problem completely whitewash their image as a Buddhist paradise? And why did India stand in the sidelines and do nothing while Hindus were watching their temples being burned and getting kicked out of the country? This is the story of the biggest targeted ethnic cleansing you've never heard about. To understand how Bhutan got here, we need to start from the beginning. Since medieval times, Bhutan has been a feudal society where a small population of land-owning feudal lords rented out their land to peasants for agriculture. That was pretty normal for the medieval age. What wasn't normal was the huge numbers of human slaves they used to import from neighboring regions like Assam, Sikkim, and Bengal. It looks like a really peaceful, chill place today, but Bhutan has a bloody history of conflicts with Tibet and Sikkim. So warlords in Bhutan always had armies ready to defend their country and invade neighboring regions. The reason why isn't really important here. Basically, Bhutan was ruled by a Buddhist monk from Tibet, but the Tibetans didn't like that he was teaching a different school of Buddhism. So they retaliated in a very peaceful Buddhist way by invading Bhutan. The crazy thing is that tiny little Bhutan built a vast network of forts and organized a bunch of small, localized armies that were successfully able to defend against multiple invasions from Tibet and even beat an army of Mongols. For more than a century, Bhutan remained undefeated and they actually ended up invading neighboring regions. But can you guess who ended Bhutan's 150-year streak of victories? They had red uniforms, a flag with blue, red and white, and it was the British. You figured that out, right? Long story short, in the early 18th century, Bhutan had gained control of a region called Cooch Behar in northern Bengal. But a rival Bengali ruler wanted to take back this province, so he asked the British for help. This was in 1772, at which point the British had already defeated the Nawab of Bengal in the Battle of Plassey, and they had probably the most advanced army and weaponry anywhere in the world. The British drove the Bhutanese soldiers out of Cooch Behar, but that wasn't enough because they then went and invaded Bhutan itself. Realizing they couldn't defeat these foreign invaders, the Bhutanese offered a peace treaty and they allowed the British to harvest timber from their kingdom. They also gave them 5 horses, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's supposed to be symbolic for them. Anyway, this peace agreement didn't really mean anything because border disputes between British India and Bhutan would literally flare up non-stop for the next 100 years, even though they were still doing business with each other. The Bhutanese regularly sent raiding parties into India where they looted the land and captured more people to be slaves. The British finally got sick of Bhutan's constant attacks and they declared war in 1864. To their credit, Bhutan put up a damn good fight, but they were simply outclassed by their enemies' superior training and firepower. They lost a solid chunk of their territory to the British, which is today part of Bengal and Assam, and the country was thrown into political turmoil. Civil wars, rebellions, the British in the south, Tibet in the north and west. Let's just say Bhutan in the late 19th century wasn't topping any world happiness rankings. But then a new leader emerged. Ugyen Wangchuk was a pro-British lord from central Bhutan who wanted to end Bhutan's old form of government, where you had one religious leader and one administrative leader ruling the country together. With the help of the British, he established an absolute monarchy in the country in 1907. This would be the start of Bhutan's new era and the start of a dynasty that still rules the nation today. Okay, now that you've had a crash course of Bhutan's history, we can talk about what happened to the Hindus of Bhutan. The rule of Ugyen Wangchuk is where things really began to change for the country. Bhutan finally had some political stability and a powerful ally in the British, so they wanted to boost their economic productivity. This is when they started to import migrants from Nepal and parts of India for manual labor. But initially, this wasn't some happy coexistence between the locals and the immigrants. The new arrivals were confined to the southern region of Bhutan and strictly forbidden from settling anywhere else. That's where they got the name Lot Shampa. It literally means southerners. Their job was to clear the land of dense forests and vegetation and work on farms to produce food for the rest of the country. And it really worked. Food production got a massive boost, and the southern region became the main supplier of food for the rest of Bhutan. By the 1950s, these Nepali immigrants were finally becoming a part of Bhutan's social fabric, taking on jobs such as bureaucrats, teachers, policemen, and even political roles. The government officially recognized the Nepali language, their social customs, and way of dressing, and they even introduced the Nepali language in schools in the southern region. In the 1960s, Bhutan's king went on a wave of modernization, starting new infrastructure projects like the East-West Highway, a network of roads that connected several towns and cities to each other. These construction projects needed labor, which meant even more Nepali and Indian immigrants were invited to Bhutan. By now, the Hindu Lhotshampa community was a significant minority group in the country, comprising anywhere between 30 to 40% of Bhutan's population. For such a homogeneous people like the Bhutanese, this wasn't exactly a comfortable situation to be in. But hey, things were going to be fine. The Lhotshampa were peaceful people, and the country's productivity was higher than ever. It was a win-win overall. But then in 1975, something big happened. Sikkim was invaded by India. You see, Sikkim was very similar to Bhutan. They were a kingdom of mostly Buddhist natives, while Nepali Hindus had migrated there for work since the 19th century. In fact, so many people migrated there that the natives became a minority group in their own country. There was growing resentment against the king of Sikkim, whose actions were increasingly discriminatory towards the Nepalis and hostile towards India. At some point, India decided to intervene and take control of the kingdom, and the people of Sikkim voted to join the Republic of India as its 22nd state. Bhutan saw all this unfolding right across their border, and the paranoia immediately set in. Just like Sikkim, they had a stagnating native population, while the number of immigrant Nepalis was growing every single year. What if India turned its attention towards Bhutan and thought, that'll be a nice addition to my collection? Suddenly, Bhutan's whole immigrant-friendly policy started to look more like a loaded gun pointed at the monarchy. The king decided not to wait around and find out. He announced a one nation, one people policy designed to enforce a singular monolithic culture on the people of Bhutan. The country would follow one religion, speak one language, follow one dress code, and respect one culture. The culture of the Buddhist natives who called themselves the Drukpa. Now, this policy was insanely strict. The Nepali language was removed from the school curriculum. Marriage between the Drukpa and the Lhotshampa revoked their access to free healthcare and education, and non-natives needed special certificates to apply for jobs, which were regularly denied. Everyone had to wear the traditional Drukpa dress in public spaces, and police were literally encouraged to heavily fine people for not following this rule, despite political backlash from the Nepali community. But by 1985, things got much worse. Bhutan passed the Citizenship Act, a law which made it much harder to become a citizen. According to this law, if both your parents were native Bhutanese, you would automatically be classified a citizen. But if even one of your parents was non-Drukpa, you were labeled a foreigner even if you were born in Bhutan and you had to apply for citizenship. The worst part was, any non-native who'd been born in or entered Bhutan after 1958 had their citizenship revoked, and they had to go through a long, painful process to reapply. Nepalis who'd been living in Bhutan for literal decades were now stateless, and since most of them had come there as manual laborers, they didn't exactly have all of their documents from 20 or 30 years ago. Obviously, the Lhotshampa weren't simply going to lie down and take this injustice. Protests broke out across the country, and activists appealed to the king to stop the government's unfair ethnic profiling. But the king just branded these people as seditious criminals and had the army round them up, throw them in prison, and torture them. The government clamped down on the freedom of press, banned peaceful protests, and arrested anyone who spoke out against the authorities. But the real horror was yet to come. In 1990, a group of radical activists blew up a bridge, destroying several army vehicles. Things quickly escalated, and in a few months, protesters were clashing with the Royal Bhutan Army. On the one hand, the government reported that protesters went on a violent spree in the towns, robbing and kidnapping people, forcing them to remove their traditional Bhutanese clothes, and even killing them. Meanwhile, the Bhutan army were equally accused of horrific violence, with reports that they had raped several women and killed many protesters. Schools were destroyed, police stations ransacked, and vehicles were hijacked around the country. Some sources say that over 200 people were killed, 500 wounded, and over 2,000 people were arrested by the security forces. The immediate aftermath of this whole bloody affair was retribution from the government, not just through violence, but by stripping away freedoms, eradicating cultural practices, and introducing more and more bureaucratic hurdles to make it impossible to continue living there. More than 80,000 Lhotshampas were forced to sign voluntary migration forms, which forfeited their lands back to the government, leaving them with no choice but to flee to Nepal. People were literally held at gunpoint to ensure they'd sign all their assets over to the authorities. Hindu temples were burnt and destroyed, and Hindus were told to pray to Lord Buddha in monasteries. Those that refused to comply were thrown in prison for treason. The government confiscated citizenship identity cards, demanding documents from as far back as 1958 to prove their legal status as residents. For Lhotshampas who had participated in the protests or had even committed minor crimes, they and their entire families would be branded as anti-nationals, evicted from their homes, and forced to leave Bhutan.
Why did he leave Bhutan actually in the afternoon?
I want to leave my country, but if I stayed back, they would have set fire in the house, locking me inside, my family. So I got scared, so I had to leave the very next day.
The ones who remained behind were ordered to demolish the houses of those who'd fled, and if they refused, they too would be deported from the country. By the mid-1990s, over 1 lakh Lhotshampas, nearly a sixth of the entire population of Bhutan, were thrown out of the country they'd called home for generations. Now they had nowhere to go except crowded refugee camps in Nepal. People who once lived happy, relatively prosperous lives just a few years ago in Bhutan were now facing malnutrition and disease, with no clear indication if they'll ever return to their home. Nepal made some attempts to repatriate some of the refugees back to their home country, but Bhutan hit the brakes on that too. They introduced new, even narrower criteria for eligibility, ensuring that less than 2.5% of the people they deported would be granted re-entry. It was only in 2007 that the United Nations started a massive program to resettle Lhotshampa refugees into countries around the world. Over the years, more than 1.1 lakh Lhotshampas have been resettled in the United States, Canada, Australia, and various European countries. there still remain between 6,000 and 18,000 Lotchampas still languishing in Nepali refugee camps. People without a home or a country to call their own. But while reading about all this, I kept wondering, why didn't India do anything about this? I mean, we intervened to help Bangladesh in 1971. Bhutan was persecuting and evicting Hindu people, and we still didn't do anything. What happened? So I decided to look into it, and really there's two main reasons why India didn't raise their voice against Bhutan. The first and most important one is simply foreign politics. India relies on Bhutan to act as a buffer between itself and China. Bhutan being a relatively peaceful, politically neutral country means that neither India nor China come into direct contact, reducing the chances of conflict. That's why the Indian government has always been friendly with the Bhutanese monarchy, and in fact, they even offered assistance to Bhutan during the 1990 protests. The second reason is that India has historically had problems with Nepali nationalists living in India demanding their own separate state called Gorkhaland. There were even violent protests in West Bengal back in the 1980s, and India obviously didn't want to give those guys any bright ideas by supporting Nepali protesters in Bhutan. Today, more than 2 lakh Lotchampas still live in Bhutan, almost 35% of the country's population, but they don't enjoy the same freedoms or liberties they once did. To be sure, it has gotten better for them since the 1990s, but social and economic discrimination still remains worse than what it was back in the 1970s. Bhutan still refuses to officially grant citizenship to a huge portion of Lotchampas, denying them the right to vote or enjoy other benefits. The state obviously denies any wrongdoing, and younger generations are simply not taught about the ethnic cleansing their parents witnessed. Most of all, thousands of Lotchampas continue to live with the loss of their closest family members and friends, who either lost their lives in the protests or were evicted from the country, never to return. But at least Bhutan has never been a puppet state to a foreign power, who controlled everything from their politics to their natural resources. Because Iran wasn't so lucky. After the Shah of Iran came under the influence of the British and Americans, democracy disappeared from the country overnight, and Iran's economy nosedived so badly that the nation ended up supporting a radical Islamist dictator. Click here to watch my video on how Iran was slowly destroyed by Western political interests and ultimately became the mortal enemy of the United States. Thanks so much for watching. Please support my channel by liking this video, get subscribed, and become a channel member to get early access to videos and exclusive content. It really helps me keep making videos like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.